The blizzard had been howling for 3 days straight when Delilah Ashford pressed her face against the frosted window pane of her father's ranch house, watching the snow pile higher against the fences until they nearly disappeared beneath the white drifts. She had just turned 19 that winter of 1883, and the cold that seeped through the glass was nothing compared to the ice in her stepmother's eyes when Delilah turned to find Margaret standing in the doorway behind her, arms crossed and lips pressed into a thin, cruel line. "Your father is sleeping," Margaret said, her voice low and venomous. "He does not need to be disturbed by your constant whining about the cold." Delilah had not been whining at all, but she had learned in the 2 years since her father married Margaret that protests only made things worse. Her father, Samuel Ashford, had been so lonely after her mother died from fever, and Margaret had seemed kind enough at first, a widow herself looking for security and companionship. But the moment the vows were spoken, Margaret's true nature emerged like a snake from beneath a rock. "I was just checking on the livestock," Delilah said quietly, keeping her voice steady. "The snow is so deep, I worry about the horses." "The horses are fine," Margaret snapped. "What I worry about is you, always underfoot, always reminding your father of his first wife. You look just like her, you know. It makes him sad to see you." The words stung because Delilah knew they were lies. Her father loved her, loved that she had her mother's dark hair and green eyes, her mother's gentle spirit. But Samuel had taken ill that autumn, a deep cough that rattled in his chest and left him weak and bedridden more often than not. Margaret had taken over running the household, and with each passing week, she grew bolder in her cruelty when Samuel was too ill to notice. "I should bring father some hot broth," Delilah said, moving towards the kitchen. Margaret stepped in front of her, blocking the way. "I will tend to my husband. You, girl, need to go check on those horses you are so worried about. The barn needs mucking out, and those stalls will not clean themselves." Delilah glanced toward the window again. The storm was worsening, the wind screaming around the corners of the house like a living thing. "It is nearly dark, and the storm—" "Are you defying me?" Margaret's voice rose sharply. "After all your father and I have done for you, giving you a roof over your head, food in your belly, you are nothing but an ungrateful burden." "I am not ungrateful," Delilah said, fighting to keep her voice from shaking. "I just think it would be safer to wait until morning." "Get out!" Margaret's face had gone red with rage, and she grabbed Delilah's arm, her fingers digging in hard enough to bruise. "Get out of this house right now and do not come back until those stalls are clean. Every single one." "Please, Margaret, my coat." But Margaret was already dragging her toward the back door, wrenching it open so that the wind and snow blasted into the kitchen. Delilah tried to grab onto the doorframe, but Margaret shoved her hard, and she stumbled out into the storm. The door slammed shut behind her with a definitive bang, and she heard the bolt slide home with a terrible finality. For a moment, Delilah stood frozen, unable to believe what had just happened. She wore only a thin wool dress and her house slippers. No coat, no gloves, no hat. The wind cut through the fabric like knives, and the snow was already soaking into her clothes. She pounded on the door, shouting to be let back in, but the wind tore her words away, and no answer came from inside. Panic rising in her throat, Delilah turned toward the barn. If she could just get there, she could bundle herself in horse blankets, wait out the storm in the hay loft where it would be warmer. But the barn was 50 yards away, and the snow was waist deep in places. The wind so strong it nearly knocked her off her feet. She pushed forward, struggling through the drifts, her hands and face already going numb. The world had become nothing but white, the house disappearing behind her within seconds, the barn invisible ahead. She tried to keep walking in a straight line, but the wind disoriented her, and her feet kept sinking into hidden drifts. Her slippers had fallen off somewhere, and her bare feet burned with cold that quickly turned to numbness. She could not feel her fingers anymore, could not feel her face. Her dress was frozen stiff against her legs, and each breath felt like ice forming in her lungs. She did not know how long she walked. It could have been minutes or hours, Everything had become a blur of white and cold and exhaustion. She fell once, twice, 3 times, each time finding it harder to get back up. The fourth time she fell, she lay in the snow and thought how easy it would be to just close her eyes, to let the cold take away the pain. She thought of her mother, wondered if this was how she would join her, frozen in the snow outside her own home while her stepmother sat warm by the fire. But something in her refused to give up. Using the last of her strength, she pushed herself to her knees, then to her feet, and kept walking. She did not know which direction anymore. She just walked, one foot in front of the other, until she could not take another step. She collapsed into a drift, and this time she could not get up. The cold had seeped so deep into her bones that she could not make her limbs obey. She tried to call for help, but her voice came out as barely a whisper. The darkness was creeping in at the edges of her vision, and she knew she was dying. She thought of her father, hoped he would understand, hoped Margaret would not poison his memory of her with lies. A tear froze on her cheek, and then there was nothing but cold and darkness. Warren Turner had been riding for 2 days straight, trying to make it to Loveland, Colorado, before the worst of the storm hit. He had been working a cattle drive up north and was heading home to his ranch just outside of town, but the blizzard had come on faster and fiercer than anyone had predicted. His horse, a sturdy bay mare named Copper, was struggling through the drifts, and Warren knew he needed to find shelter soon, or they would both freeze to death out here. He was 26 years old and had seen plenty of Colorado winters, but this one was shaping up to be one of the worst in memory. The wind was so loud he could barely hear himself think, and he could see no more than a few feet in front of him. He gave Copper her head, trusting the horse's instincts to find shelter better than his own. When Copper suddenly stopped and refused to go forward, Warren almost urged her on, thinking she was just tired. But horses had good instincts, and something had caught her attention. He dismounted, his legs stiff and cold, and peered through the snow. At first he saw nothing, just another drift. But then he saw a patch of dark blue fabric, and his heart seized in his chest. He lunged forward, dropping to his knees and brushing away the snow. It was a woman, her skin blue-white with cold, her lips purple, her eyes closed. She was not moving. Warren ripped off his gloves and pressed his fingers to her throat, searching desperately for a pulse. For a horrible moment he felt nothing, and then, faint as a butterfly wing, he felt it. She was alive, but barely. "Hold on," he said, though he knew she could not hear him. "Just hold on." He could not take her on Copper, not in this storm. The horse was already exhausted. But as he looked around, he saw the vague shape of a building through the snow. A barn, maybe, or a house. He scooped the woman into his arms, alarmed at how light she was, how cold, and staggered toward the building. Copper followed, as loyal as ever. It was a house, a ranch house, and Warren did not hesitate. He climbed the porch steps and pounded on the door with his boot. The woman cradled in his arms. "Help! Open up! I have someone freezing out here." After a long moment, the door opened a crack, and a hard-faced woman peered out. "What do you want?" "This woman needs help," Warren said urgently. "She is half frozen to death. Please, let us in." The woman's eyes flicked to the girl in his arms, and something unreadable crossed her face. "I do not know who that is. She does not live here." Warren stared at her in disbelief. "Madam, she is dying. I found her in the snow not 50 yards from your door. Please." "I said I do not know her." The woman started to close the door, but Warren jammed his boot in the gap. "I am not leaving her out here to die," he said, his voice hard as iron. "If you will not help, then at least tell me where the nearest town is." "Loveland is 3 miles south," the woman said coldly. "Now get off my property." She slammed the door in his face, and Warren heard the bolt slide home. For a moment he stood there, rage and disbelief warring in his chest. What kind of person would turn away someone freezing on their doorstep? But he had no time to waste on his anger. The woman in his arms was dying, and he was her only chance. He carried her to the barn, which thankfully was unlocked. Inside, it was marginally warmer, protected from the worst of the wind. He set her down gently on a pile of hay and began stripping off her wet clothing, his hands moving quickly despite their stiffness. He had to get her out of the frozen fabric. She was so cold she felt like ice, and she was not responding at all. Her breathing was so shallow he could barely see her chest rise and fall. Warren pulled off his heavy coat and wrapped it around her, then his wool shirt, leaving himself in just his undershirt. He gathered more hay and piled it around her for insulation, then pulled her against his chest, wrapping his arms around her and trying to share what little body heat he had left. He chafed her hands and feet, trying to get the blood flowing again, wincing at how frozen they were. "Come on," he murmured. "Come on, stay with me. You are going to be all right." He talked to her for hours, nonsense mostly, anything to keep himself focused and awake. He told her about his ranch, about copper, about the cattle drive he had just finished. He told her about his sister back in Wyoming and how he had not seen her in 2 years. He told her about the first time he had seen snow as a child, coming west from Missouri. Gradually, slowly, he felt her start to warm against him. Her breathing deepened slightly, became more regular. As dawn broke, gray and cold, but with the storm finally starting to ease, she stirred in his arms. Her eyelids fluttered, and she made a small sound of pain. "Easy," Warren said softly. "You are safe. Just rest." Her eyes opened, green as spring grass, and focused on his face, with confusion and fear. "Who, where?" "My name is Warren Turner," he said. "I found you in the snow last night. You were nearly frozen. Do you remember what happened?" For a moment she just stared at him, and then tears welled in her eyes and spilled down her cheeks. "Margaret," she whispered, "she locked me out." Warren felt that cold rage return. "The woman in the house? She locked you out in the storm?" Delilah nodded, her whole body starting to shake, though whether from cold or shock or emotion, he could not tell. "My stepmother. I am Delilah Ashford. This is my father's ranch." "That woman said she did not know you," Warren said grimly. "When I brought you to the door, she turned us away." Fresh tears spilled down Delilah's face. "She has always hated me. But I never thought she would." Her voice broke, and she buried her face against his chest, sobbing. Warren held her, his arms tightening protectively around her. What kind of monster would do this to her own stepdaughter? If he had not found her, Delilah would be dead right now, frozen in the snow. And that woman would have let it happen, maybe even wanted it to happen. "Where is your father?" he asked gently. "Inside. He has been ill. Lung fever. He does not know what Margaret does when he is sleeping." Delilah's voice was muffled against his chest. "I have to go back. I have to see him." "You are not going anywhere near that woman," Warren said firmly. "Not until you are stronger and we can figure out what to do." "But my father—" "We will get help," Warren promised. "But first we need to get you warm and dry. Can you ride?" Delilah pulled back slightly, looking down at herself. She was wearing Warren's coat, which dwarfed her, and she was wrapped in hay. Her cheeks flushed red. "I am not decent." "Your dress was frozen solid," Warren said matter-of-factly. "It is drying over there, but it will take time. For now, warmth is more important than modesty." He paused. "I have a ranch about 4 miles from here. It is not much, but it is warm and safe. Will you let me take you there?" Delilah hesitated, clearly torn between propriety and desperation. Finally, she nodded. "Thank you. You saved my life." "And I am going to make sure you stay alive," Warren said. He stood and went to check on Copper, who had weathered the night well enough in the barn. He gave the horse some water from a trough and a portion of the oats he found stored there. Then he helped Delilah to her feet, steadying her when she swayed. Her feet were badly frostbitten, and she gasped in pain when she tried to put weight on them. Without a word, Warren lifted her into his arms again. She weighed hardly anything, and he wondered when she had last had a proper meal. He settled her on Copper's back, then mounted behind her, keeping one arm wrapped firmly around her waist. She leaned back against him, and he could feel her trembling. The storm had passed, leaving the world buried under feet of snow that glittered in the weak morning sunlight. Warren guided Copper carefully, letting the horse pick her way through the drifts. It took twice as long as it should have to reach his ranch, but finally, the buildings came into view. It was a small spread, just a house, a barn, and a few outbuildings, but Warren had built it all himself over the past 3 years, and he was proud of it. He carried Delilah into the house and set her down carefully in a chair by the fireplace. The house was cold, the fire having gone out days ago, but Warren quickly got a blaze going. He filled a kettle with water and set it on to heat, then rummaged through his things until he found a clean shirt and a pair of trousers. "These will be too big, but they are dry and warm," he said, handing them to her. "I will step outside while you change." "Wait," Delilah said, her voice small. "Please do not go far." The fear in her eyes made his chest ache. "I will be just on the other side of that door," he promised. "You are safe here, I give you my word." He stepped into the bedroom and closed the door, giving her privacy. While he waited, he changed into dry clothes himself, his body finally starting to thaw from the long night. When Delilah called that she was dressed, he came back out to find her sitting by the fire, drowning in his clothes but looking infinitely better than she had in the barn. The color was starting to return to her face, though her lips were still tinged blue and her hands and feet were red and swollen. Warren made tea and brought it to her, then examined her feet carefully. "You have frostbite," he said quietly. "I need to warm these slowly. It is going to hurt." Delilah nodded, her jaw set. "I understand." He filled a basin with lukewarm water and eased her feet into it, and she bit back a cry of pain. Tears streamed down her face, but she did not pull away. Warren kept one hand on her ankle, his touch gentle and steady. "I am sorry," he murmured. "I know it hurts." "You saved my life," Delilah said through gritted teeth. "A little pain is a small price to pay." Over the next hour, Warren gradually added warmer water to the basin, bringing her feet back to life. By the time he was done, Delilah was exhausted, her face pale and drawn. He made her some simple broth from dried beef and vegetables, and she ate it slowly, as though she had not had a proper meal in days. Maybe she had not. "Tell me about your father," Warren said, sitting across from her. "How ill is he?" "Very ill," Delilah said softly. "The fever has been in his lungs for months now. He has good days and bad days. On his good days, he gets out of bed, and Margaret is sweet as honey. On his bad days, when he is sleeping most of the time, she shows her true nature." She looked up at Warren, her eyes haunted. "I have tried to tell him, but she always makes it sound like I am the one causing trouble, like I am jealous of her place in his life. And he is so tired, so sick. He does not want to believe his wife could be cruel." "But locking you out in a blizzard," Warren said, his voice hard. "That goes beyond cruelty. That is attempted murder." Delilah flinched at the word, but she did not deny it. "I think she wants me dead," she whispered. "I think she wants my father's ranch for herself, and I am in the way. If I am not there when he dies, she gets everything." "We need to go to the sheriff," Warren said firmly. "This cannot stand." "And tell him what?" Delilah's voice was bitter. "That my stepmother locked me out? She will say I went out on my own, that I was foolish. She will say I am lying to cause trouble. It will be my word against hers, and she is a respectable married woman." "Who will believe me?" Warren wanted to argue, but he knew she was right. He had seen enough of frontier justice to know that without proof, it would be hard to make a case against Margaret. "Then what do you want to do?" Delilah was quiet for a long moment. staring into the fire. "I want to see my father," she finally said. "I want to make sure he is all right. And then I do not know. I have nowhere else to go." "You can stay here," Warren said immediately. "For as long as you need." Delilah looked at him, really looked at him, for the first time since she had woken in the barn. He was a tall man, broad-shouldered and lean, with dark hair and eyes the color of warm honey. His face was weathered from years of outdoor work, but there was a kindness in his expression, a steadiness that made her feel safe. He had saved her life, asked nothing in return, and was now offering her shelter. It was more than she had any right to expect from a stranger. "Why are you helping me?" she asked softly. Warren shrugged. "Because you need help. Because it is the right thing to do. Because—" He paused, then met her eyes. "Because I could not live with myself if I let anything else happen to you." Something warm unfurled in Delilah's chest, something she had not felt in the 2 years since her father remarried. "Hope." "Thank you," she whispered. They spent the rest of that day quietly. Warren tended to his animals, checking on the cattle that had weathered the storm in the shelter of a canyon on his property. Delilah rested by the fire, her body still recovering from the terrible cold. That night, Warren gave her his bed and slept on the floor by the fireplace, insisting that she needed the rest more than he did. The next morning, Delilah's feet were better, though still painful. Warren helped her into a pair of his boots, stuffed with extra socks to make them fit, and bundled her in his spare coat. Together, they rode back toward her father's ranch, Warren keeping Copper at a careful walk. When they arrived, Warren helped Delilah down and walked with her to the front door. She knocked, and after a moment, Margaret opened it. The woman's face went white when she saw Delilah, and her eyes narrowed with rage. "What are you doing here?" Margaret hissed. "I live here," Delilah said, her voice stronger than she felt. "I have come to see my father." "Your father does not want to see you," Margaret said, but her voice lacked conviction. "Then let him tell me that himself," Delilah said. She pushed past Margaret, Warren following close behind. "You cannot just barge in here." Margaret started, but Delilah was already moving down the hallway toward her father's room. She opened the door to find Samuel Ashford lying in bed, looking thin and gray. But his eyes were open, and when he saw her, his face lit up with joy and relief. "Delilah," he said, his voice weak but clear. "Thank God. Where have you been? Margaret said you ran off 2 nights ago, that she could not stop you. I have been so worried." Delilah felt her throat tighten with emotion. She crossed to the bed and took her father's hand. "I did not run off, Papa. Margaret locked me out in the storm. I nearly froze to death. If this man had not found me, I would be dead." Samuel's eyes widened, and he looked past her to Warren, then back to Margaret, who had followed them into the room. "Margaret, is this true?" "Of course not," Margaret said quickly. "She is lying. She went out to the barn and stayed out there all night in some kind of fit of temper. I called for her to come in, but she would not listen." "That is a lie," Delilah said, her voice shaking with anger. "You dragged me to the door and pushed me out without my coat, without my boots. You locked the door and would not let me back in. I pounded and shouted, but you ignored me." "Samuel, you cannot believe her," Margaret said, her voice rising. "She has always been jealous of our marriage, always tried to come between us. This is just another attempt to turn you against me." Samuel looked between his wife and his daughter, and Delilah could see the confusion and pain in his eyes. He wanted to believe her, she could tell, but he had loved Margaret, had trusted her. "Sir," Warren said, stepping forward, "my name is Warren Turner. I own the ranch about 4 miles south of here. I found your daughter in the snow 2 nights ago, less than 50 yards from your house. She was not dressed for the weather. No coat, no boots. Her skin was blue, and she had no pulse I could find at first. I brought her to your door, and a woman answered. I told her I had someone freezing who needed help. She looked at your daughter and said she did not know her. She told me to leave. The color drained from Samuel's face. Margaret, is this true? Did you turn them away? I did not know who they were, Margaret said, but her voice was less certain now. It was dark and the storm. You knew, Delilah said quietly. You looked right at me and you knew. You wanted me to die out there. That is a lie, Margaret shrieked. You are an ungrateful, wicked girl, and I will not stand here and be accused. Enough! Samuel's voice was weak but commanding. He fell into a coughing fit, and Delilah rushed to help him sit up, rubbing his back until the spasm passed. When he could speak again, he looked at Margaret with something like horror in his eyes. Get out! Samuel, please. Get out of this house, Samuel said, his voice shaking. Pack your things and leave. I will not have you under my roof for another moment. Margaret's face twisted with rage and fear. You cannot throw me out. I am your wife. A wife who tried to murder my daughter, Samuel said. I will have the marriage annulled. You will leave this ranch with what you brought to it and nothing more. If you are not gone by nightfall, I will have the sheriff remove you. For a moment, Margaret looked like she might argue further, but the look in Samuel's eyes must have convinced her he was serious. She spun on her heel and stormed out of the room. They heard her slamming drawers and doors, and within the hour she had packed a bag and left, taking the wagon and one of the horses. Samuel sagged back against the pillows, looking even more exhausted than before. I am so sorry, Delilah, he whispered. I should have listened to you. I should have seen. You were ill, Papa, Delilah said, tears streaming down her face. You could not have known. I should have protected you better. He looked at Warren. Thank you for saving my daughter. I owe you a debt I can never repay. You owe me nothing, sir, Warren said. I only did what anyone would have done. Not anyone, Samuel said quietly. You are a good man, Warren Turner. He paused, coughing again. I am dying, you know. The fever has gone too deep. I can feel it. Papa, do not say that. It is the truth, Delilah, Samuel said gently. I have known it for a while now, but I am glad I will live long enough to set things right. He looked at Warren again. Will you stay? Just for a few days. I do not want Delilah to be alone. Warren glanced at Delilah, who was looking at him with desperate, hopeful eyes. Of course, he said. I will stay as long as you need me. Samuel Ashford died 3 days later, his daughter holding one hand and Warren holding the other. It was a peaceful passing, and Delilah wept, but also felt a sense of relief that her father was no longer suffering. The local pastor came and said words over the grave they dug on a hill overlooking the ranch. Margaret did not return for the funeral, and Delilah was grateful. After the funeral, the pastor pulled Delilah aside. Your father came to see me 2 days before he passed, he said quietly. He had me draw up a will, leaving everything to you. The ranch, the livestock, everything. He also had me file for an annulment of his marriage to Margaret on grounds of attempted murder. It should go through without any trouble, given Mr. Turner's witness testimony. Delilah felt tears prick her eyes again. Even at the end, her father had been thinking of her, protecting her. Thank you for telling me. That night, as Delilah and Warren sat by the fire in the ranch house, the silence felt heavy with unspoken words. Finally, Delilah spoke. You have been so kind to me, she said softly. You saved my life, stayed with my father in his last days, helped me bury him. I do not know how to thank you. You do not need to thank me, Warren said. He had been thinking a lot over the past few days, about Delilah and about his own life. He had been alone for so long, focused only on building his ranch, on surviving. But having Delilah around, even in such sad circumstances, had reminded him how empty his life had been. She was brave and kind and beautiful, and he found himself thinking about her constantly. What will you do now? Delilah looked around the house, at the home she had grown up in. I suppose I will run the ranch. It is mine now. Papa made sure of that. She paused. But I do not know if I can do it alone. I do not know anything about running a ranch. I could help you, Warren said, then quickly added, if you want, I could teach you about the livestock, about managing the land. My ranch is small enough that I could spare the time. Delilah looked at him, and something warm and hopeful bloomed in her chest. You would do that? I would, Warren said. He met her eyes, and the look that passed between them was electric. Delilah, I know this is not the right time, and maybe I should not say anything, but I have not been able to stop thinking about you. I know we have only known each other for a few days, but they have been the most important days of my life. You are brave and strong and kind, and I... He stopped, unsure how to continue. And you what? Delilah whispered, her heart pounding. And I am falling in love with you, Warren said quietly. I know it is too soon. I know you are grieving your father. But I needed you to know. Delilah felt her breath catch. She had thought she was the only one feeling this impossible pull between them. It is not too soon, she said softly. Or maybe it is, but I do not care. I am falling in love with you too, Warren Turner. You saved my life in more ways than one. Warren stood and crossed to her, kneeling beside her chair. He took her hand gently in his. Then let me keep saving it every day for the rest of our lives. Marry me, Delilah. Let me help you run this ranch. Let me wake up next to you every morning and thank God I found you in that snow. Tears were streaming down Delilah's face, but she was smiling. Yes, she whispered. Yes, I will marry you. Warren stood and pulled her to her feet, and then his lips were on hers, soft and warm and full of promise. Delilah melted into him, wrapping her arms around his neck, and for the first time since her mother died, she felt truly safe, truly loved. They were married a month later in the same church where they had buried her father. It was a small ceremony, just a few neighbors and the pastor, but Delilah had never been happier. She wore a simple blue dress, and Warren wore his best suit, and when he said his vows, his voice was steady and sure. I promise to love you and protect you for all my days, he said, looking into her eyes. I promise to be your partner in all things, to listen to you and value you. I promise to build a life with you that is full of joy and laughter and love. Delilah's own vows were just as heartfelt. I promise to stand by your side through all the challenges life brings. I promise to be your partner and your friend. I promise to love you with all my heart every day for the rest of my life. When the pastor pronounced them man and wife, Warren kissed her with such tenderness that Delilah felt her heart might burst. They walked out of the church hand in hand, ready to start their new life together. They decided to combine the two ranches, working both properties as one larger spread. It was hard work, but they did it together, and that made all the difference. Warren taught Delilah everything he knew about ranching, and she proved to be a quick study, unafraid of hard work or long hours. She also taught him things about managing a household, about finding joy in small moments. Their first year of marriage was not without challenges. There were droughts that tested their water supply, and wolves that went after their calves. There were long, cold winters when the work seemed endless, but through it all, they had each other, and that was enough. On their first anniversary, Warren surprised Delilah with a gift. It was a beautiful mare, white as snow, with kind eyes and a gentle disposition. Her name is Snowfall, Warren said, handing Delilah the reins, because she reminds me of the night I found you, the night my whole life changed. Delilah threw her arms around him, tears of joy streaming down her face. I love her. I love you. I love you too, Warren murmured against her hair. More than I ever thought possible. That night, as they lay in bed together, Delilah rested her head on Warren's chest and listened to the steady beat of his heart. Do you ever think about that night? she asked softly. About how close I came to dying? Every day, Warren admitted. And every day I thank God that Copper stopped when she did, that I found you in time. I used to be angry at Margaret for what she did, Delilah said. But now I realize that if she had not locked me out, I never would have met you. We never would have fallen in love. In a strange way, her cruelty led to the greatest happiness of my life. That does not make what she did right, Warren said firmly. No, it does not, Delilah agreed. But it does mean that sometimes good can come from terrible things. We just have to be strong enough to find it. Warren tightened his arms around her. You are the strongest person I know. Only because you helped me find that strength, Delilah whispered. In the spring of their second year of marriage, Delilah discovered she was pregnant. The news filled them both with joy and a bit of fear. They were so happy together, just the two of them, and the thought of adding a child to their family was both thrilling and terrifying. What if I am not a good mother? Delilah worried one evening as they sat on the porch, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of gold and pink. You will be an amazing mother, Warren said, placing his hand gently on her still flat stomach. You are loving and patient and kind. Our child will be lucky to have you. What if something goes wrong? Delilah's voice was small. What if I am like Margaret? What if there is something cruel in me that I do not know about? Warren turned her to face him, his hands gentle on her shoulders. Listen to me, Delilah Turner. You are nothing like Margaret. You have a good heart, a loving heart. You would never hurt anyone, especially not our child. I know this as surely as I know the sun will rise tomorrow. Delilah leaned into him, drawing comfort from his steady presence. How did I get so lucky to find you? I think I am the lucky one, Warren murmured, pressing a kiss to her forehead. The pregnancy was not an easy one. Delilah was sick for the first few months, barely able to keep anything down. Warren fretted over her constantly, bringing her ginger tea and crackers, rubbing her back when the nausea got too bad. As she grew bigger, the work became harder, but she refused to stop helping around the ranch. I am pregnant, not an invalid, she told Warren when he tried to get her to rest more. I know that, Warren said, exasperated, but you are carrying our child. You need to take care of yourself. I am taking care of myself by staying active, Delilah argued. Besides, there is too much work to be done for me to sit around all day. They compromised, with Delilah doing lighter tasks and Warren taking on the heavier work. It was not a perfect solution, but it kept them both reasonably happy. In the early winter, as the first snow began to fall, Delilah went into labor. Warren sent for the midwife, a capable woman named Mrs. Henderson who lived in Loveland, but the labor progressed quickly. By the time Mrs. Henderson arrived, Delilah was already well along. This baby wants to meet the world, Mrs. Henderson said with a smile. Let us help it along. The labor was long and difficult, and there were moments when Warren feared he would lose both Delilah and the baby. He held her hand through it all, whispering encouragement and love, praying harder than he had ever prayed in his life. Finally, as dawn broke over the mountains, filling the room with soft golden light, their son was born. He came into the world with a lusty cry that made Warren laugh with relief and joy. You have a beautiful, healthy boy, Mrs. Henderson said, placing the baby in Delilah's arms. Delilah looked down at her son, at his tiny, perfect face and his shock of dark hair, and felt her heart overflow with love. Hello, little one, she whispered. We have been waiting for you. Warren sat on the edge of the bed, his arm around his wife, looking down at his son with wonder. He is perfect, he said, his voice choked with emotion. He is absolutely perfect. They named him Samuel after Delilah's father, and he was the light of their lives. Warren proved to be a devoted father, doting on the boy from his first breath. He would carry Samuel around the ranch, talking to him about the animals and the land, even though the baby was too young to understand. You are going to spoil him, Delilah teased one afternoon, watching Warren walk the baby around the pasture. Impossible, Warren said with a grin. There is no such thing as spoiling a child with too much love. As Samuel grew, he proved to be a happy, curious baby, always smiling and reaching for new things. He had his mother's green eyes and his father's determined jaw, and both his parents agreed he was the most beautiful child ever born. Life on the ranch settled into a comfortable rhythm. They worked hard during the warm months, preparing for the harsh Colorado winters. They attended church in Loveland most Sundays and slowly built friendships with their neighbors. People were curious about the young couple who had married so quickly, but when they saw how happy Warren and Delilah were together, how devoted they were to each other and to their son, the gossip faded. When Samuel was 2 years old, Delilah discovered she was pregnant again. This time the pregnancy was easier, and she was able to help more around the ranch. Their daughter was born on a warm summer day, with much less drama than her brother's birth. They named her Catherine, after Warren's mother, and she was a quiet, serious baby who studied the world with solemn blue eyes. She is going to be a thinker, Delilah said, watching her daughter's intense expression as the baby examined her own tiny fist. Like her mother, Warren said, pressing a kiss to Delilah's temple. With two young children, life became even busier. But Warren and Delilah worked as a team, splitting the responsibilities of the ranch and the children. They had hired a young man named Tom to help with the heavier ranch work, which freed up more time for Warren to spend with his family. On quiet evenings after the children were asleep, Warren and Delilah would sit on the porch together, watching the stars come out over the mountains. These were Delilah's favorite times, when the world was peaceful and she could just be with the man she loved. Do you ever regret it? Warren asked one night. Marrying me so quickly? Taking on all this responsibility? Delilah looked at him in surprise. Never. Not for one single moment. Why would you ask that? Warren shrugged, looking uncomfortable. Sometimes I worry that you gave up too much, that you could have had an easier life if you had waited, found someone with more money or better prospects. Warren Turner, you listen to me, Delilah said firmly. She turned to face him, taking his hands in hers. You saved my life. You loved me when I felt completely alone in the world. You gave me a home, a family, a life full of joy and meaning. I could not imagine being happier than I am right now. You are everything I need, everything I want. Do not ever doubt that. Warren's eyes were suspiciously bright in the starlight. I love you so much it scares me sometimes. The thought of anything happening to you. Nothing is going to happen to me, Delilah said, squeezing his hands. We are going to grow old together. Watch our children grow up, have grandchildren. We are going to have a long, happy life together. I promise you that. You cannot promise that, Warren said softly. Then I will promise this, Delilah said. I will love you with everything I have for as long as I live, and I will fight to stay by your side, always. Warren pulled her into his arms, holding her close. That is a promise I can accept. The years passed, each one bringing new challenges and new joys. There were hard times, years when the weather or the market made money tight. There were good times when the calves were healthy and the prices were high. Through it all, Warren and Delilah faced everything together, their love growing deeper and stronger with each passing year. Samuel grew into a strong, capable boy who loved the ranch as much as his parents did. He learned to ride almost before he could walk, and he had a natural way with the animals. Catherine was quieter, preferring books to horses, but she was sharp as a tack and could calculate figures faster than her father. When Samuel was 7 and Catherine was 5, the family took a trip to Denver. It was the first time Delilah had been to a big city, and she was overwhelmed by the crowds and the noise. But Warren held her hand through it all, pointing out the sights, buying the children peppermint sticks, and taking them to see the new railroad station. On the last night of their trip, they stayed in a hotel, a luxury they rarely allowed themselves. After the children were asleep in the adjoining room, Warren and Delilah lay in the comfortable bed, listening to the sounds of the city outside. Do you ever miss it? Delilah asked. The adventure, the freedom of your life before we met? Not for a second, Warren said immediately. Before I met you, I was just existing, going through the motions. You gave my life meaning, Delilah. You and the children are my adventure now. Delilah smiled in the darkness. I feel the same way. Before you found me in that snow, I thought my life was over. I thought I would never be happy again. But you showed me that even the darkest moments can lead to the greatest light. I wish I could have found you sooner, Warren said quietly. I wish I could have saved you from all those months with Margaret, from all that pain. But then we would not have this story, Delilah said. We would not have this connection. Everything happened exactly as it was meant to, and it led us here to this moment. I would not change a single thing. Warren rolled over to face her, his eyes serious in the dim light filtering through the curtains. You are the most remarkable woman I have ever known. And you are the best man I have ever known, Delilah replied. She reached up and touched his face gently. Thank you for loving me. Thank you for letting me, Warren whispered. And then he kissed her with all the love and passion that still burned between them, as brightly as it had that first day. When Samuel was 10 and Catherine was 8, they welcomed another son into their family. This one they named William, and he was a perfect blend of his siblings, with his father's determination and his mother's gentle nature. He completed their family in a way they had not realized they needed. By the time Samuel turned 18, he was running much of the ranch alongside his father. He was a natural leader, confident and capable, and Warren was proud of the man his son had become. Catherine had developed a head for business and kept the ranch's books with meticulous care. She was also courting a young lawyer from Loveland, a good man named Joseph who treated her with respect and affection. William, at 8 years old, was still young, but he showed promise in everything he tried. He was the charmer of the family, always able to make everyone laugh. One evening, as Warren and Delilah watched Samuel work with a difficult horse, gentling it with patience and skill, Delilah leaned against her husband with a contented sigh. Look at what we built, she said softly. Look at this life, this family. Sometimes I still cannot believe it is real. It is real, Warren said, wrapping his arm around her waist. And it is more than I ever dreamed possible. Do you remember that night? Delilah asked. The night you found me? Every detail, Warren said. I remember thinking you were an angel at first, because you looked so peaceful lying there in the snow. Then I realized you were real, and you were dying, and I have never been so terrified in my life. I remember waking up in the barn, Delilah said, opening my eyes and seeing your face, feeling safe for the first time in so long. I think I started falling in love with you in that moment. I know I fell in love with you then, Warren said. I just did not realize it at the time. I thought I was just being a decent person helping someone in need, but the truth is, from the moment I saw you, something in me recognized something in you. We were meant to find each other. We were, Delilah agreed. She turned in his arms to face him. I love you, Warren Turner. More today than yesterday, and less than I will tomorrow. That is beautiful, Warren said with a smile. I read it in one of Catherine's books, Delilah admitted with a laugh. But it is true. My love for you just keeps growing. Mine too, Warren said, pulling her close. Mine too. Catherine married Joseph when she was 20, and it was a beautiful wedding. The whole town of Loveland turned out to celebrate, and the ranch was filled with music and laughter. Samuel walked his sister down the aisle, since he was the eldest, and there was not a dry eye in the church. Another daughter gone, Warren said to Delilah, as they watched Catherine and Joseph dance at the reception. Not gone, Delilah corrected gently. Just starting her own adventure. They are staying in Loveland, so we will see her often. I know, Warren said, but it is still hard to let go. That is what parents do. Delilah said, taking his hand. We love them, we raise them, and then we let them fly. But they always come home. She was right. Catherine and Joseph visited often, and when they had their first child, a little girl they named Delilah, Warren and Delilah became grandparents. It was a role they embraced with joy, spoiling their granddaughter shamelessly. Samuel married a few years later to a rancher's daughter from the next county over named Elizabeth. She was a strong, practical woman who fit right into the family, and she and Samuel built a house on the far corner of the ranch. They would run that section of the land while Warren and Delilah maintained the main ranch with William's help. As Warren and Delilah entered their 50s, they began to slow down a bit, letting the younger generation take on more of the heavy work, but they were still active, still engaged in the life of the ranch. They had built something lasting, something that would outlive them, and they were proud. One winter evening, almost 30 years after the night Warren had found Delilah in the snow, they sat together on the porch, bundled in warm blankets, watching the snow fall gently over the mountains. The ranch was quiet, the livestock settled for the night, smoke curling from the chimneys of the various houses that now dotted their property. Do you ever think about Margaret? Delilah asked suddenly. Warren glanced at her in surprise. Sometimes. Why? I heard she died last year, Delilah said quietly. In Wyoming. She never remarried, apparently. Died alone. I am sorry to hear that, Warren said, and he meant it. No one deserves to die alone. I used to hate her, Delilah admitted, for what she did to me, for the fear and pain she caused. But now I just feel sad for her. She was so consumed by bitterness and greed that she destroyed her own chance at happiness. If she had just tried to be kind, if she had just accepted me, she could have had a good life. Instead, she threw it all away. That is a very compassionate way to look at it, Warren said. I learned from the best, Delilah said, smiling at him. You taught me that love is stronger than hate, that forgiveness is more powerful than vengeance. You showed me what it means to truly live, rather than just survive. You gave me the same gift, Warren said. Before you, I was just going through the motions. You taught me what it means to love someone completely, to build a life together. You made me whole. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching the snow. Finally, Warren spoke again. If you could go back, knowing everything you know now, would you still choose the same path, knowing all the pain you had to go through first? Delilah did not hesitate. Yes, every single time, because that pain led me to you, and you have given me a life beyond my wildest dreams. We have children, grandchildren, a ranch that thrives, and most importantly, we have each other. I would walk through that blizzard 100 times if it meant ending up here, with you. Warren felt his throat tighten with emotion. Even after all these years, Delilah still had the power to move him deeply. I love you, he said simply. I love you too, Delilah replied. She leaned her head on his shoulder, and they watched the snow together, two souls who had found each other in the darkness and built a life full of light. As the years continued to pass, Warren and Delilah grew older, their hair turning gray, their steps slowing. But their love never dimmed. If anything, it grew stronger, deeper, more profound. They had been through so much together, weathered so many storms, both literal and figurative. They knew each other completely, the good and the bad, and loved each other anyway. When Warren turned 60, his joints began to ache in the cold weather, making it harder to work the ranch. Delilah would massage liniment into his shoulders in the evenings, her touch still gentle and loving after all these years. We are getting old, Warren said one night with a rueful smile. We are getting experienced, Delilah corrected, and we have earned every one of these gray hairs and aching joints. I would do it all again, Warren said. Every hard day, every challenge, as long as I got to do it with you. And I with you, Delilah said. She kissed his forehead gently. We have had a good life, Warren Turner. A very good life. The best life, Warren agreed. As they moved into their 60s, Warren and Delilah took on more of an advisory role on the ranch, letting Samuel and William handle the day-to-day operations. They spent their time with their grandchildren, of which there were now 6, and enjoyed the slower pace of life. Catherine's daughters, Delilah and Emma, were bright and curious, always asking their grandparents to tell them stories about the old days. Samuel's sons, Samuel Jr. and Robert, were already showing an interest in ranching, following their father around like devoted shadows. William, who had married a teacher named Margaret, a kind woman with no relation to the stepmother of terrible memory, had twin boys named James and Thomas, who were the terrors of the family, always getting into mischief. Warren and Delilah loved them all fiercely, grateful for every moment they got to spend with their growing family. They hosted large dinners every Sunday, with all their children and grandchildren gathered around the table, and these were the moments Delilah treasured most. Looking around at all these people, this family they had created together, she felt her heart overflow with gratitude. One spring morning, when Warren was 68 and Delilah was 66, they took a ride together up into the mountains, just the two of them. They rode slowly, their old horses content with the easy pace, and stopped at a meadow filled with wildflowers. "This is where I want to be buried," Warren said suddenly. Delilah looked at him in alarm. "Warren." "I am not dying tomorrow," Warren said with a gentle smile. "But I am an old man, Delilah. We both are getting on in years. I just want you to know that when my time comes, this is where I want to rest, here with the mountains and the sky and the wildflowers. And I want you next to me when your time comes." Delilah felt tears prick her eyes, but she nodded. "All right, this meadow it is. It is beautiful here." "It is," Warren agreed. He dismounted carefully and helped Delilah down, and they stood together in the meadow, hand in hand. "I have been thinking a lot about that night lately, the night I found you." "Why?" Delilah asked. "Because it was the night I truly started living," Warren said. "Everything before that was just preparation, just waiting, and everything after has been a gift. You have been my gift, Delilah, the greatest gift I have ever received." "You saved my life," Delilah said, tears streaming down her face now. "In every way a person can be saved." "And you saved mine," Warren replied. He cupped her face in his weathered hands, looking into her eyes with all the love of nearly 4 decades together. "I want you to know that I have no regrets. None. Every day with you has been a blessing. If I died tomorrow, I would die the happiest man who ever lived." "Please do not die tomorrow," Delilah said with a watery laugh. "I am not ready to let you go yet." "Then we will just have to stick around a while longer," Warren said. He pulled her into his arms, and they stood together in the meadow, holding each other, grateful for every moment they had been given. Warren lived another 7 years, staying active and engaged almost to the very end. When he finally passed, peacefully in his sleep at the age of 75, with Delilah holding his hand, the whole community mourned. He had been a good man, a kind man, and he had touched many lives. They buried him in the meadow he had chosen, with a simple headstone that read, "Warren Turner, beloved husband, father, and grandfather. He saved a life and built a legacy." Delilah grieved deeply, as was natural after losing the love of her life, but she did not lose herself to grief. She had learned too much about the importance of living, of finding joy even in sorrow. She continued to be active in her children's and grandchildren's lives, continued to help run the ranch as much as her aging body would allow. She lived another 8 years after Warren's death, and they were good years, filled with love and family. Her children and grandchildren surrounded her with affection, and she never felt alone. But she never remarried, never even considered it. Warren had been her one true love, and she was content to honor his memory until they could be together again. When Delilah passed, at the age of 81, she died peacefully in her sleep, just as Warren had. Her last thoughts were of that snowy night so many years ago, of opening her eyes in a barn and seeing a kind face looking down at her, of the moment she had been saved in every sense of the word. They buried her next to Warren in the meadow, her headstone reading, Delilah Turner, beloved wife, mother and grandmother. She found love in the storm and built a home in the heart. At the funeral, Samuel, now an old man himself, stood before the gathered family and spoke about his parents. My mother and father taught us many things, he said, his voice strong despite his age. They taught us the value of hard work, the importance of family, the power of perseverance. But most importantly, they taught us about love, not the easy, comfortable love that comes without effort, but the deep, abiding love that is chosen every single day. They showed us that even the darkest moments can lead to the greatest blessings, that hope and kindness can triumph over cruelty and despair. They built this ranch, yes, but more than that, they built a legacy of love that will continue through all of us, through our children and our children's children. And we are all better for having known them. As the family gathered around the graves, sharing stories and memories, a light snow began to fall, dusting the wildflowers and the mountains with white. And if anyone had been listening very carefully, they might have heard the echo of laughter on the wind, the sound of two souls reunited at last, dancing together in an eternal meadow where the wildflowers always bloom and the snow always falls soft and gentle like a blessing from above. The ranch continued to thrive for generations, passed down through the family, each new generation adding their own chapter to the story while honoring the foundation that Warren and Delilah had built. The story of how they met, of the cowboy who had found a young woman frozen in the snow and saved her life, became family legend, told and retold to each new child born into the family. And in Loveland, Colorado, people still spoke of Warren and Delilah Turner, the couple who had proven that true love could bloom even in the harshest winter, that kindness could triumph over cruelty, and that sometimes the worst moments of our lives lead us to exactly where we are meant to be. Their love story became a testament to the resilience of the human spirit, to the power of compassion, and to the truth that sometimes salvation comes in the most unexpected forms, on the darkest nights, when we need it most. The meadow where they were buried became a special place for the family, a place of pilgrimage and remembrance. Couples who were struggling would go there to remember what true partnership looked like. Parents who were overwhelmed would go there to remember what mattered most. Children would play among the wildflowers, never quite understanding why this place felt so peaceful, so full of love, but sensing it nonetheless. And every winter, when the first snow fell, the family would gather at the meadow, all the descendants of Warren and Delilah Turner, and they would stand together in the cold, remembering the night that had started it all. They would remember the stepmother who had locked her out, the blizzard that should have killed her, the cowboy who had found her blue and barely breathing. They would remember the love that had grown from that terrible night, the family that had been built, the legacy that continued. And as they stood there watching the snow fall soft and gentle, they would feel gratitude for the twist of fate, the moment of compassion, the spark of love that had brought them all into existence. They were living proof that even the darkest storms eventually pass. That morning always comes after the longest night, and that love, true love, can survive anything, even death itself. The story of Warren and Delilah Turner lived on, not just in the family, but in the community, a reminder to everyone who heard it that kindness matters, that compassion can change lives, that love is worth fighting for. It was a story of the Wild West, yes, with its harsh winters and hard living, but more than that, it was a story of the human heart, of its capacity for both cruelty and kindness, for both despair and hope, for both death and life. And in the end, it was a love story, the best kind of love story, the kind where two people find each other against all odds, build a life together filled with joy and sorrow, laughter and tears, and love each other faithfully until the very end and beyond. It was a story that proved that sometimes being saved is not just about surviving, but about finding someone who makes you want to truly live. And Warren and Delilah Turner had done exactly that every single day for the rest of their lives.